Hi there. Today we're going to be tying the Elk Hair Caddis. This is a really traditional pattern. It can be tied in lots of different color combinations. This represents the adult caddisfly. You could use a light colored elk hair. I'm going to use kind of a medium gray elk hair today. And it can be also tied in a very dark color. It's almost like a dark dun color. The body color can also vary from like a peacock herald green to a really beautiful jade colored caddis green, tan, gray. A lot of the natural neutral colors work really well. Hackle also as well is generally brown, but probably could use a grizzly hackle or a light tan dry fly hackle too. So let's get started. So I'm going to put a hook in the vise, and in the recipe I posted, I used a size 16 hook, but I'm going to use a size 14 just because it's a little easier to see on the camera. And this particular hook is a big eye hook from Orvis. It's a great option if you have trouble seeing your hook eye or getting the tippet into the eye of the hook on the water. Makes it a whole lot easier. And I think it's also easier for tying because it's easier to keep the eye out of the pattern. So first things first, we're going to tie on using some brown thread. This is a 70 denier, which is the equivalent of an 8/0 thread. First one you tie, you might want to use a little bit heavier thread just because when you tie down the elk hair, it might snap on you. You want to use good even pressure, but once you practice a couple of times, you should be able to do it with the lighter thread, no problem. So, okay, so we're going to take the thread and we're going to just address the hook and tie on about 1 eye length back. I have to say that one of the biggest problems I had as a beginner, and every now and then when I'm not careful, is crowding the eye. It really is a tough situation. You tie a beautiful fly and you tie it off, and then you have a lot of hairs going over the eye of the hook, and it's impossible to finish it without getting hairs in there and glue, and pretty tough to tie your tippet on the water. So just be mindful of that and try to stay back from the eye of the hook. I'd rather have too much room than too little. So the first thing we're going to tie on is some wire, and you might see recipes that call for oval gold tinsel instead. Some of the older recipes. I think wire is more durable. It's thinner, and I think you get a little flash from it. I think that it's a better thing to tie on than the tinsel. If it's all you have, that's no problem. It's more traditional. So we're going to just take our wire and put it at a little bit of a diagonal. If you've gotten a little too much in there, you can always just pull it right on back and bind that down nice and tight to the hook, and then back again, keeping that wire. I keep it on my side right down to the bend of the hook. It's a little long, so I can keep that in my material clip maybe. It's a little springy, doesn't want to go there. Okay, yep. It's only going to be there for a minute. Okay, so the next thing we're going to tie on, and I'm using a little bit of an alternative method. I'm going to tie the dubbing on, put the dubbing on, and then the hackle is going to come backwards. You'll see in a second. So you could put hackle on at this point and then dub it, but you'll see why I like to do it the other way. This is, Awesome Possum natural brown dubbing, and it's pretty similar to a dry fly dubbing. It's very soft, has a natural color to it, very neutral. I'm just going to take little bits of dubbing and twist them on using lots of pressure, and then slide them up to the hook. Just pulling off a little bit at a time, getting those fibers lined up when you pull it off the bundle there, and that is probably way more than enough. Do want to be cautious not to put too much dubbing on at a time, because it's a whole lot harder to get off of the thread than to add more. So I'm going to back the camera up a little bit to give myself some room, and we're just going to nice tight wraps, dub that noodle onto the hook, And I think I got just the right amount there. Yep. And you want to end at about the 1/4 to 1/3 mark back from the hook eye. Okay, so leaving the wire there, we're then going to put some dry fly hackle on, and you want the hackle size to match the size of the hook. So if I had a hackle gauge, I would judge the hackle against that and see that it gets pretty close to a size 16. You could also go like that on your fly and see how it looks. Remember that you're not going on the bare metal of the hook, you're going around it, so a little smaller feather is going to appear bigger. Yeah, go figure. Okay, so the feathers have kind of a webby base, and you'll see that there's a change that right about there. You'll see the little peak of webbiness in there. So I'm just going to cut that off because you don't want that softer part. You want this to be a nice spiky hackle. And I'm going to just pull back about a 1/4 inch worth of fibers and strip them off of the stem. Take that bare stem, just at a diagonal like you did with the wire, and we're going to bind this nice and tight down to the hook. You can come back a little bit. I ended that dubbing a little high up, so, and then trim off the excess. I'm going to back up a little bit too again. This feather's nice and long, so I don't need to use hackle pliers, but if it was a shorter feather, I would use hackle pliers to do this next step. And we're going to just take that and wrap it backwards towards the bend using nice even wraps. There's no magic number, 7 I would say was a good number, but whatever size hook you have is going to really dictate how many times and how much space there is in between them. So put as many as you can on there, and then you're going to counter wrap with the wire. And so I'm going to bind that hackle down really tight with a couple of turns right at the base of the fly where the bend goes down, and then take that wire and sort of zigzag it right through those hackle fibers. If you saw the woolly bugger video, this is very similar to what we did with the grizzly hackle on the woolly bugger. Till you get up to the bare hook again, do a couple of wraps, bind it down really well, and then you can snip off or helicopter off the excess wire. And if you're going to helicopter off, you want to get a lot of pressure, so I take that bobbin and cinch it right up to the hook and then hold it there, and that'll keep it in place. So okay, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit there, and then there's the tag end of that hackle. If you have a rotating vise, it's a great thing. You can just move that vise so that you can really get at it with the very tip of your feather with your scissors. This feather was nice and long, so I could use it for my next fly, so don't get rid of it. Okay, now the wing for the Elk Hair Caddis. We're going to use this deer hair, and I'm going to take my scissors and just pull back. You can use your bodkin too, sometimes that's helpful. A chunk of deer hair. It's a little hard to do on camera, so I'm going to do that and take a hunk of it off, but I need to do it on the table. It's just a lot easier to do it that way. And take off a little bit more than you think you need. So a pretty healthy clump there, and you can see all those little guard hairs. They need to be removed before we go on any further. So I'm just going to flare it out with my fingers a little bit and then just pull off those guard hairs. They're all very fuzzy. And if you leave them in there, that keeps the hair from being able to stack properly and slide up against each other. Now the next step is to take that bundle of hair and we're going to put it in a stacker. So this is a pretty basic stacker. We're going to put the tips in first, give it a bunch of really good whacks, on some firm surface. I'm going to pull the two pieces apart. I usually try to put it a little bit at a slant so that they don't come sliding out, and you can see that the tips are really nicely aligned there. Pull them out with one hand. I usually take another attempt to get the fuzzies out. If you have a nice fine comb, that's also a really great way to ensure. You can see that I still had quite a bit in there. There's actually some on the fly. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is measure the length of the wing. So I keep transferring this from one hand to the next. Now if you feel like you have too much, now would be the time to pull some out, and I think I do have too much, so I'm going to just remove some, and after you do a couple of flies, you'll get a sense of how much is the right amount to do. And what I want is the hairs to come right up against the bend of the hook. Now I can see that they've come a little bit unaligned, so I'm going to stack them again. There's no harm in that. So I'm going to take my stacker, I'm going to put them in there again, and now I think that looks a lot better. There's some color variation in there. I think that's probably part of what we're seeing. So, okay, measure it. You want the ends of the deer hair, excuse me, the elk hair to come right to the bend of the hook. And then I'm going to transfer that measurement to my other hand and cut it off bluntly, leaving about 1/8 of an inch exposed. Now there's a couple of different ways to do this, but this is the way I prefer. You can take a little bit of an angled cut to remove some of that hackle right there. That'll keep it, the wing to lay down nicely. Take that little bundle of deer hair, make sure it's not extending anywhere past the eye. Give your thread a little counterclockwise spin, and you're going to do 2 loose wraps right there at the tie-in point, and then pull up nice and firm. Do another wrap, pull up, do another wrap, and pull up. And you want to hold on to the wing the whole time. If you feel it slipping at all, keep going, because you don't want it to slip off and be misaligned. And then I'm going to take some little wraps, and I'm going to go right through that hair, kind of at an angle, working my way down to the eye of the hook. Once I get down there, I can then let go, and then do a couple of turns around the eye. I'm having a little tough time getting in there, so I'm going to use my half hitch tool. I'm going to twist it around. So you do that so you can see it. Twist it around my half hitch tool, and I'm just going to get a half hitch up in there just because it was a little tight to do a whip finish. So this is an alternative to whip finishing. Now that I have it all cinched down, it's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to attempt to do a whip finish and get right in there. There we go. Whoop. There we go. And do a nice couple of turns there. Cut your thread off. If you want to, you don't have to. You could trim this head up a little bit. Some people do, some people don't. Just get in there at an angle and do a couple of trims. If there's any wily hairs in there, take a look at it from the bottom. Make sure it's nice and even. And there you have it, the Elk Hair Caddis. Keep trying it. The first one you make is probably going to be a mess. The 6th one is going to be looking beautiful, but that first one is probably going to catch fish anyway. So we don't have to make beautiful flies all the time, but you will with practice. So thank you. Tight lines.